In continuation with our first lecture, and before moving ahead for understanding how to write the books of account, how to finalize the final statements, let us first understand some basic terms that we are going to use while doing this accounting work. Basically, there are 5 basic terms. So, all the financial transactions or financials book recording, they are actually the sub classifications of these 5 important items in an organization. These are assets, liabilities, capital, expenses and income. We will look into further detail in greater depth that what are the various subclasses of these 5 heads, 5 basic items that we are going to use while writing books of account, and an explanation about that so that you understand the fundamentals of recording the transactions and into various accounts, categorizing them into debit and credit transactions. So, to understand all these things, it is very important to understand these 5 items in further detail, in very greater detail. Starting with the assets. The vocabulary meaning of assets we all know, but to explain an item or to describe an item as asset in an organization, in a business, there has to be 3 key properties of a particular item, so that we can classify it into assets. Number 1 is the ownership, then economic value and resources. Ownership means assets in an organization represents the ownership that can be eventually turned into cash and cash equivalents. That simply means anything that a firm owns, that a firm has in its name, any property is termed as asset. That asset should have an economic value, and that economic value means that the particular item what we are describing as asset can be exchanged or sold. So, if anything does not have any economic value, we cannot consider it as an asset. That is a separate a term which is there for such assets which do not have economic value. But anything which a firm owns, any property which a firm owns in its name which has an economic value will be considered as an asset. Then the resources. Assets are resources that can be used to generate further economic benefit. This is one very economic operating definition of the assets, that simply means anything which is used to generate the revenue, which is used to generate the income for the business, which a business or an organization uses for its operations, for running its operations, is termed as asset. So, anything which has these 3 property will be termed as asset in an organization. Assets can be further classified into various heads. We will be using all these subheads or all these terminology while describing our various transaction which we need to record. So, there are 3 bases on which assets can be classified, on the basis of convertibility, on the basis of physical evidence, on the basis of usage. On the basis of convertibility, assets can be classified as current assets and non-current assets. On the basis of physical existence, we can have tangible assets or intangible assets. On the basis of uses, we can classify assets as operating assets or non-operating assets. So, any assets that you identify as an asset, you can put them into any of these subcategories, subclassification, and it is important to understand these classifications so that we can understand the treatment that has to be done on that particular assets. अगर कोई financial transaction या financial कोई होता है assets के साथ transaction, उसकी recording के लिए it's important to understand the nature of the assets. और especially when we are going to do the ratio analysis or do the analysis of the financial performance or the financial position of a company, it is important to understand what kind of assets has what kind of value. So at that point of time this classification will help you. So we must understand clearly कि कौन से टाइप की assets firm के पास है और assets को classify किन basis पे और किस तरह से किया जाता है. Let us move ahead. On the basis of convertibility, I told you assets can be classified as current assets or non-current assets. Non-current assets, if we talk about, current means for that is used for near term, for present. In business concept, in business organization, the current means anything which is happening within a year, that will be termed as current. So if I say non-current, that means anything which is used further after 1 year, that will be non-current. So when I say non-current assets, you can simply say it a long-term asset also. Okay? Non-current assets are assets that can be easily and readily converted into cash, that cannot be easily and readily converted into cash or cash equivalents. Non-current assets are also termed as fixed assets, long-term assets or hard assets. These assets will serve the business for more than one purpose. So very simply you need to understand only 3 points here, that any assets which has a value which will be used in an organization for more than 1 year will be termed as non-current asset or simply the fixed assets, right? For example, look at these examples: land, building, machinery, equipments, patents and trademarks. So when I say building is an asset for firm because firm has invested in it, it has an economic value, the ownership of that building lies with the firm, and there are certain resources firm, by using that building firm will be generating resources. So it is very much an asset for the firm. But what type of asset? Is it a current or non-current? So just understand one thing, that the building that the firm has as asset will be used for more than 1 year. Year on year the firm or business will be using that same building, operations will be done in the same building. So it is termed as non-current assets, right? So ये जो permanent type का nature होता है एक particular asset का, which can be used for more than 1 year, which not be readily converted into cash. You cannot sell building in normal course of action for your business. So such assets will be termed as fixed assets, non-current assets or long-term assets or hard assets, whatever name you call it. Just understand what is the feature of non-current assets. Number one is should be in use for more than 1 year, cannot be readily converted into cash, and that firm will be recurringly using it for generating revenue, income or in operations, using it in operations from year to year, year on year they will be using such assets, will be termed as fixed assets. So these fixed assets will be recorded into asset sides of the balance sheet. In asset side of the balance sheet all sort of assets will be recorded, but you have to group them, categorize them at one place. So it is important first to understand what are these fixed assets and which assets you will classify as fixed assets or non-current assets. So look, just search for these 3 key aspects and then you can classify it as a non-current assets. Then come on to the current assets. It is opposite to non-current assets. So current assets represent those assets for the firm which actually the firm owns, but which the firm do not have an intention to use such assets year on year. That means it will be used, consumed and will be converted into cash within that particular year. So such assets will be termed as current assets, right? For example, raw material. If a business purchase certain raw material, now look into the nature. Firm has purchased the raw material stock, so firm has the ownership. Such items also has an economic value and revenue and income will be generated using the stock. So it is very much an asset. It is classified as an asset, but what type of assets? Firm do not have intention to keep this stock over the period of year, but they are trying to consume these assets in their process of production, so that revenue can be generated, and when finished goods will be produced, they will be sold and the cash will come into the firm. So, it is readily converted into cash within a year. So, all such assets will be termed as current assets. Look at the definition. Current assets represent all the assets of the company that are expected to be converted, sold, consumed, utilized or exhausted through the standard business operations, which can lead to the conversion of cash value over the next one period only. So, current assets include cash, cash equivalents, account receivables, stock inventory, marketable securities, prepaid liabilities or other liquid assets. But you have to check into only two features, that it should be readily converted into cash within a year. The firm has an intention to consume them, utilize them or to use them into their standard operation, to convert them into cash and to generate revenue and income for the business. Such assets is classified as current assets, right. Then the other basis of classification, which is either it is a tangible or intangible assets. So, all these assets, current assets or non-current assets, they can further be classified as tangible or non-tangible. So, when I say tangible, tangible means anything which has a physical existence. Physical existence means which can be seen, which can be touched, which can be felt, which actually occupies a place and you have it with you. Such assets are tangible assets. For example, building, you can touch it, you can see it, this is a tangible assets. Plant and machinery, tangible assets. Even stock and raw material, tangible assets. Anything which has a physical existence is termed as tangible assets, right. For example, land, building, machinery, equipment, cash, office equipments, stock, marketable securities, natural resources like mines, oil wells. So, all these are tangible assets because you can touch them, feel them, they have a physical existence, right. At this point of time, I want to clear one more thing. The asset is something which has the capacity to generate revenue and income for the firm, right. So, जिसके पास भी ये capacity है to generate resources for the firm, we classify them as asset. So, your ownership, your economic value of that particular item and the resource generation capacity is the three basic key property for an item to be classified them as asset. So, all these examples which I have written here, they have the capacity to generate resources for the firm in terms of sales and revenue. So, they are termed as tangible assets. But there are something else which is used to generate revenue for the firm, but which you cannot see. All such thing will be termed as intangible assets. So, assets that do not physically exist, but they have an economic value, and these assets are classified as intangible assets, right. They must be identifiable or they may not be identifiable. Now, let us take an example. Let us say particular company has a brand equity. Brand equity means they have a brand value, they have a goodwill. Out of that goodwill, they are charging premium to the market and this is generating sales. So, this goodwill item, it is very much an asset because it has an economic value. You own this goodwill, you can actually identify them, you can quantify them and record them in your balance sheet also, and it is something, it has the capacity to generate revenue and income for the firm. So, they fall under the definition of assets, but you cannot touch the goodwill. So, such type of assets is termed as intangible assets. Another example could be the copyright. Take for instance a pharma company. They have come out with a new innovation, a new drug, a new medicine, right, and they have gone to get a patent over it. Patent means they have the exclusive right to produce that particular formulation. So, this patent will be termed as asset. Reason being, the firm owns these patents, it has an economic value and it has the capacity to generate sales and revenue for the firm, but you cannot touch patent, right, but it is very much an asset. So, such type of assets will be termed as intangible assets. So, an intangible assets can either be generated internally by the business, or it can be acquired also by way of separate purchase. You can purchase copyright, you can purchase patent, you can purchase goodwill also, right. So, intangible examples are copyright, patent, trademarks, these are intangible things. Let us further explain this term goodwill. When one company buy another company, it is buying more than just assets of a balance sheet. It is buying something which is intangibles. For example, let us take an example of the company Apple, right. Apple commands a premium pricing in the market because of the brand equity, the brand Apple, right. So, they have this goodwill in the market, they can quantify this goodwill. So, any firm which has such type of recognition in the market, brand recognition in the market or goodwill in the market, if they are bought by another company, so it is not only the value of assets or value of tangible properties जो buyer pay करेगा, they will be paying them more, और वो जो जिस चीज़ के लिए pay करेगा that will be a goodwill amount, right. This implies that a firm purchasing another company pay more than the fair market value of the business assets. Assets means physical assets. If the excess purchase price cannot be attributed to brand, patent, brand, copyright or any other type of intangible assets, it will be termed as goodwill. So, goodwill is very much invisible, right, but it has a value, and that value is determined by the buyers and seller. A company knows the value, the extra earning capacity of that company will be termed as goodwill. Another classification of assets is on the basis of uses, which is operating assets and non-operating assets. Assets that are actively used in production process and in daily operation of the business are known as operating assets. For example, cash, stock, building, machinery. Now, you see here we have a mixture of tangible, intangible assets here, that can be termed as operating assets. We have a mixture of current and non-current, that means fixed and current assets here, that can be termed as operating assets, because here the classification is on the basis of whether they are actively used in the process of production or not. If they are actively used in the process of production, we term them operating assets, because cash you are daily using to run the operations, daily routine operations of your business. Similarly, the stock and the building and the machinery, right. Now, let us check what are non-operating assets. So, non-operating assets are those assets which are not required for daily business operations, but can still generate revenue. For example, the investment, short term investment, marketable security, vacant land, interest income from fixed deposits. So, all these investment made by a business is an asset for the business, but they are not used in the production process. For example, a company, it has good let us say the profitability, and it has generated cash also in duration in terms of its normal business operations from 2 to 3 years. So, if the company has excess cash, they can invest it in maybe in some marketable securities or FDs, or can buy shares of another company. So, this investment is very much an asset for the business. They may be generating revenue, interest revenue or dividend revenue. They have a economic value, they are owned by the business. So, they are very much an asset, but they are not used, consumed or being used in your normal core business activity, in your normal production activity. So, such assets are known as non-operating assets. While doing further detail, doing the details of balance sheet, we will understand how these various type of assets are recorded in the balance sheet, how they are grouped and how they are being shown in the balance sheet. So, these are various type of assets that we have understood today. Other than this, there are some few assets also which we will be referring while doing our bookkeeping or accounting work, is fictitious assets. Now, again go back to the definition of asset. The assets is something which a firm owns, which has economic value and which has a capacity to generate resources in terms of sales and revenue, right. Now, what is fictitious assets? Fictitious assets are not actually the assets in true sense, but it is a huge amount of expenses or losses which are unclaimed in profit or loss during that year. बहुत सिंपल टर्म्स में अगर आपको समझाऊँ तो लेट अस फर्स्ट टेक एन एग्जांपल सो दैट यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड दिस, राइट. For example, a company has went for a huge advertisement campaign, right, which where the company has expended some crores of rupees for a big advertisement campaign where they will be, you know, getting in some film stars or some big personality to endorse their product and all. So this expenditure has a capacity to generate revenue not only for that year but for future year also. Let's say they have made Amitabh Bachchan as their brand ambassador, for which they have paid a lot. Now this endorsement will be benefited, company will be benefited by this endorsement for, let's say, 4 to 5 years to come. So it is not sensible that that particular advertisement expenses is charged during that period only, कि सिर्फ उसी पीरियड के एक्सपेंसेस मान लिए जाए उसको, क्योंकि वो एक्सपेंसेस 5 साल तक प्रॉफिट जनरेट करेगा, 5 साल तक सेल्स जनरेट करेगा. सो द नेचर विल बी ऑफ एसेट्स, उस एक्सपेंस का नेचर एसेट की तरह बन जाएगा, जो हम 5 साल में उसे 1/5 करके उस पर्टिकुलर एक्सपेंस को प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस में उस पर्टिकुलर ईयर के लेके जाएंगे. क्योंकि जो 5 साल के लिए एक्सपेंडिचर कर रहे हैं उसे सिर्फ उसी साल की सेल से अगर माइनस कर दें तो इट इज़ नॉट जस्टिफाइड, राइट. सो सच टाइप ऑफ एक्सपेंडिचर, अब इसको रखेंगे कहाँ, किस फॉर्म में रखेंगे? सो दे आर एक्चुअली टर्म्ड एज एन asset, and such assets are known as fictitious assets. So fictitious assets are shown in asset side of the balance sheet because they have the capacity to generate revenue for future year. They are used for long term, not for short terms. So they have a nature of assets but they are not truly an asset, right. Similarly, their firm can go for some R&D expenditure. तो R&D एक्सपेंडिचर अगर कोई नया फार्मूलेशन या कुछ नया इनोवेशन है दैट इज़ गोइंग टू जनरेट रेवेन्यू फॉर द फर्म फॉर नेक्स्ट सो मेनी ईयर्स, सो वो पर्टिकुलर एक्सपेंडिचर विल बी ट्रीटेड एज द एसेट फॉर द कंपनी. और जितने साल वो एक्सपेंडिचर बेनिफिट करेगा उस एक्सपेंडिचर को उतने पार्ट्स में डिवाइड करके डेप्रिसिएशन की तरह हर ईयर की सेल्स से या इनकम से उसे माइनस कर दिया जाएगा. सो ये नेचर तो ट्रीटमेंट एसेट्स के साथ होता है. सो दे आर नोन एज फिक्टिशियस एसेट्स, राइट. Point to be noted while treating some assets as a fictitious assets. Now understand this. Fictitious assets have no physical existence, or you can say they are intangible assets. These type of assets are just expenses which are treated as assets. They have no realizable value. Remember that. क्योंकि you not sell them in the market. आप मार्केट में सेल नहीं कर सकते हैं. Tangible and intangible assets you can sell in the market, whether it is a machinery or it is a goodwill or patent. But these fictitious assets is a sunk cost. You have already incurred the cost. So they have no realizable value. You have the economic value but you don't have any market realization value of these particular assets. They are amortized. Amortized is another word for depreciation. Depreciation is for physical assets and amortization is used for fictitious assets, or can write off in one then more profitable financial years. So जितने सालों के लिए बेनिफिट जा रहा है उस पर्टिकुलर एक्सपेंडिचर का उतने सालों में उसे राइट ऑफ किया जाता है, राइट. दिस इज ऑल अबाउट एसेट्स.